Anna's mornings began in a pattern as predictable as the ticking of the clock. At 54, her days moved with a rhythm that offered little in the way of surprise. She would wake at dawn, brew a pot of coffee, and sit by the window of her modest apartment, watching the world outside stir to life. The silence was her constant companion, one she had grown accustomed to over the years. Friends were few, her children had their own busy lives, and romance was a chapter she had long since closed. Her weekly grocery trips were one of the few excursions that broke the monotony. On this particular Tuesday, she moved through the aisles of the local store, absently scanning shelves for the items on her list. She lingered by the produce section, inspecting the oranges, when a voice broke her focus. "Excuse me, ma'am. Do you know how to pick the good ones?" Anna turned, her gaze landing on a man who couldn't have been much older than 30. His dark hair fell slightly over his forehead, and his eyes held a mixture of curiosity and warmth. He held up an orange, his expression earnest. She blinked, surprised by his question. "The good ones?" He smiled, a dimple appearing in his cheek. "Yeah, my grandma swears there's a secret, but I never figured it out." Anna chuckled, the sound unfamiliar even to herself. "It's not that complicated," she said, taking the orange from his hand. She showed him how to check for firmness and weight, a small grin tugging at her lips. "Ah," he said, watching her intently. "So you're an expert." "I've been wandering through life clueless about citrus." Something in his tone made her laugh again, a genuine, soft laugh she hadn't heard in years. She handed the orange back to him and, for a fleeting moment, their fingers brushed. It was the smallest thing, but it sent a ripple through her chest, a sensation she quickly dismissed. "Well, now you know," she said, stepping back. "Thanks for the lesson." He paused, waiting for her to offer her name. "Anna," she said, feeling a strange flutter in her stomach. "I'm Mark," he replied, flashing another disarming smile. The exchange was brief, and yet as Anna moved on to the next aisle, she found herself glancing back, catching a glimpse of him holding an orange up to the light, as if testing her advice. It was a tiny moment, inconsequential in the grand scheme of things. But as Anna placed her groceries on the checkout counter and made her way back home, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, like a faint spark lighting up the edges of her otherwise predictable world. The next week, Anna found herself back at the grocery store. She hadn't given much thought to Mark since their brief encounter, but as she moved through the aisles, she caught herself scanning the space more carefully, as if on some unconscious level, she was searching for him. Her cart rattled softly as she rounded a corner, and there he was, standing by the bread section, holding 2 loaves of sourdough and looking utterly indecisive. "Can't figure out the bread this time," Anna teased, her voice surprising even herself. Mark's head shot up, his face lighting up as he recognized her. "Anna, the citrus expert. Back to save me from more poor grocery choices." She laughed softly. "Sourdough is hardly rocket science. Easy for you to say." He held up the 2 loaves. "One says artisan, and the other is just bread. Do I want to be fancy today or practical?" Anna reached for the loaf labeled artisan and handed it to him. "Live a little." Mark grinned. "You know, I'm starting to think I need a personal shopping coach." They moved through the store together after that, their conversation flowing with unexpected ease. Mark asked her opinion on everything from the best kind of pasta to whether almond milk was worth trying. Anna found herself enjoying his company more than she had anticipated. There was something refreshing about his energy, uncomplicated, light-hearted, and entirely unself-conscious. By the time they reached the checkout, their carts were filled, and Anna realized she had spent more time in the store than she typically did. "Thanks for all the tips," Mark said as they wheeled their carts toward the parking lot. "I feel like I've just leveled up in grocery shopping." Anna smiled, glad to be of service. He paused, his hand resting on the handle of his cart. "You come here often?" The question was simple, casual, but Anna felt a sudden warmth in her cheeks. "Every week," she admitted. "Good to know." He gave her a playful salute. "Maybe I'll see you around." As Anna drove home, she found herself smiling more than she had in years. For the first time in a long while, the silence of her apartment didn't feel so heavy. There was a new kind of lightness in her chest, a strange and unfamiliar sense of anticipation that she couldn't quite name. Anna hadn't consciously planned to return to the store at the same time the following week, but as she pushed her cart through the familiar aisles, she felt a flicker of hope. She caught herself glancing toward the produce section, the bakery, and finally the dairy case, but Mark was nowhere to be found. Disappointment settled in her chest, and she scolded herself for expecting anything. They'd had a pleasant exchange, nothing more. She was too old to be holding her breath for chance encounters with a man nearly half her age. And yet, just as she reached for a carton of eggs, his voice reached her ears. "Tell me, do eggs have secret rules, too?" Anna turned, her heart skipping a beat. There he was, smiling at her with a carton in hand. She laughed, shaking her head. "No tricks with these. Just check for cracks." "Well, I'd better defer to the expert," he said, placing the carton in his basket. "How have you been, Anna?" The warmth in his tone caught her off guard. It wasn't just polite small talk, he seemed genuinely interested. "Good," she replied, feeling oddly shy. "And you?" "Better now," he said with a wink, the casual charm of it leaving her slightly flustered. They continued their meandering together, much like before, but this time their conversation grew deeper. Mark spoke of his work as a freelance designer, the freedom it gave him to explore his creative passions, and how he sometimes felt like he was wandering through life without a map. Anna listened intently, her own stories tumbling out in return. She told him about her years working in administration, her 2 grown children who called when they remembered, and the solitude that had become both a comfort and a cage. "Sounds like you've got wisdom to spare," Mark said as they lingered by the coffee aisle. "Wisdom?" Anna smirked. "That's just what people say when they mean you're old." Mark's brow furrowed, and his voice softened. "That's not what I mean. I like talking to you, Anna. You've lived a life I can learn from." The sincerity in his voice made her chest tighten. She felt seen, truly seen, in a way she hadn't in years. By the time they reached the parking lot again, Mark hesitated. "Would you want to grab coffee sometime?" he asked, his tone casual but his expression hopeful. Anna froze for a moment, caught off guard. I suppose that would be nice," she said, her voice betraying a nervous quiver. "Great." He handed her a scrap of paper with his number. "Text me when you're free." As Anna watched him walk away, a mix of excitement and fear swirled within her. This connection, so unexpected and thrilling, felt like a crack in the routine she had built her life around. A crack that let the light in. Anna spent the next few days glancing at the slip of paper with Mark's number more often than she cared to admit. It sat on her kitchen counter, daring her to take a step she hadn't taken in years. To reach out, to invite someone into her life. Her mind whirled with questions. Why did he ask me? What could he possibly see in me? The stark age difference loomed large in her thoughts, like a silent specter mocking her. But alongside the doubt was something else, something warm and undeniable. She felt alive in a way she hadn't since her children were small, or perhaps since the early days of her marriage. Her heart fluttered at the thought of their conversations, his easy laugh, the way he seemed to hang on her words like they mattered. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Anna found herself sitting by the window, clutching a cup of tea. She stared at her phone, her thumb hovering over the screen. Just text him. It's coffee, not a marriage proposal, she told herself. With a deep breath, she typed a quick message. Hi, Mark. It's Anna. Would you like to meet for coffee this Saturday? She hit send before she could overthink it. The reply came minutes later. Hi, Anna. I'd love to. Saturday morning works great. Let me know where to meet you. Her pulse quickened as she set the phone down. She should have felt relieved, but instead, she felt a strange, almost electric nervousness. The days leading up to Saturday were a blur of second-guessing. She chose and discarded outfits, caught herself rehearsing things to say, and even contemplated canceling more than once. But when Saturday morning arrived, she forced herself out the door, her heart pounding as she approached the cafe they had agreed upon. Mark was already there, waving from a corner table. The sight of him made her heart skip, a reaction she hadn't expected, or maybe one she had tried to deny. The coffee date was light and easy, just like their grocery store encounters. They laughed over Mark's stories about difficult clients and Anna's anecdotes about raising her kids. He listened to her with such attentiveness that it made her cheeks flush. But as she watched him speak, a realization struck her like a bolt of lightning. It wasn't just his smile or his laugh that she enjoyed, it was him. His energy, his kindness, the way he looked at her like she was the most fascinating person in the room. By the time they parted ways, Anna's mind was a whirlwind of emotions. She walked home in a daze, the truth settling into her heart. She was falling for him. The revelation left her breathless. It was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. How could she, a woman in her 50s, feel this way about someone so much younger? The fear of judgment loomed large, but it couldn't snuff out the light that had started to glow within her. For the first time in years, Anna felt as though her life was unfolding into something new and unexpected. It scared her, but more than that, it thrilled her. Anna's revelation weighed on her like a secret too heavy to keep but too fragile to share. She spent sleepless nights staring at the ceiling, her heart and mind caught in a storm of conflicting emotions. What am I doing? She wondered. Every time she thought of Mark, a warm, fluttering feeling bubbled in her chest, but it was quickly chased by doubt. The difference in their ages felt like a chasm, one that society would judge harshly if they ever tried to cross it. She could hear the whispers already. What does he see in her? Doesn't she know better? And yet, every time she tried to bury her feelings, memories of him rose unbidden. The sound of his laughter, the sparkle in his eyes, the way he leaned in as if her words were the most important thing in the world, it was all so vivid, so present. Anna couldn't deny the truth anymore. She had tried reasoning with herself, tried listing all the reasons why this was absurd, but the heart has its own logic, and hers had already chosen Mark. Still, the fear of judgment loomed large. She avoided her reflection in the mirror, as if the woman looking back at her might scold her for her foolishness. What do you think you're doing, Anna? You're too old for this. The loneliness she had lived with for years had been a quiet, familiar ache, but now it felt sharper, more unbearable. Mark had brought light into her life, and now the thought of letting that light dim was too painful to bear. She found herself distracted during her daily routines. At work, her mind wandered. At home, she ignored the television and the stack of unread books by her bed. Her thoughts always circled back to him, but along with the fear came another feeling, a quiet defiance. Why should she feel ashamed for wanting happiness? Was she really supposed to close herself off just because society had decided that love after a certain age was somehow unseemly? One evening, as she sipped a glass of wine in her living room, the question hit her with startling clarity. What if I just stopped caring what people think? It was a radical thought, one that both terrified and exhilarated her. Could she really do it? Could she push past her fear and take a chance? She thought about Mark, the way he had effortlessly slipped into her life and made her feel seen in a way she hadn't in years. That kind of connection didn't come along often, maybe not even once in a lifetime. For the first time in weeks, Anna smiled. It was a tentative smile, but it held a spark of hope. She wasn't ready to give up on the possibility of happiness just yet. Her heart still warred with her head, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to let fear make the decision for her. The days that followed were a strange mix of hesitation and resolve. Anna's mind kept circling back to the idea of seeing Mark again. What did she want from him? Was it simply friendship, or was there something deeper, something more, something she hadn't allowed herself to consider for years? She had to admit to herself that it was more. It was the spark, the energy, the longing she felt every time they spoke. And as much as she feared it, she couldn't ignore it. The desire to get closer to him was too strong, too urgent. But she couldn't just wait and see where this would go, couldn't just sit idly by and hope he would somehow take the first step. She needed to invite him over. The thought seemed so simple, so innocent on the surface, but in her heart, it felt like she was standing at the edge of a precipice, unsure if she should jump or turn back. Anna spent several days wrestling with her decision, imagining every possible scenario. Would he be uncomfortable? Would he even be interested in taking their relationship beyond the casual conversations at the grocery store? Or worse, would she make a fool of herself? But as the weekend approached, a surprising clarity began to settle over her. She wasn't going to let the fear of rejection or judgment hold her back any longer. This was her life, and if she wanted to take a chance on something that could bring her happiness, she was going to do it. She thought about the invitation carefully, trying to find a reason that didn't seem too forced or forward. She could invite him over for a coffee, perhaps, something casual, something that felt safe. They could talk, laugh, share stories, just like they did every time they met at the store, but this time in the privacy of her home. There was a flutter of nervousness in her chest, but it was quickly overshadowed by excitement. The idea of Mark in her space, of seeing him outside the bright, sterile aisles of the grocery store, felt intoxicating. Anna spent hours tidying her apartment, making sure everything was just so. She put on soft music in the background and prepared a light meal. She even debated over which wine to serve, wanting everything to feel just right but not too perfect. She didn't want to appear as if she were trying too hard. Finally, after checking her phone one last time, she typed a simple message. "Would you like to come over for coffee sometime? I'd really enjoy spending more time with you." She stared at the screen for a long moment before hitting send, her heart racing in her chest. There was no turning back now. She waited. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Finally, a reply pinged through, and for a moment, Anna's breath caught in her throat. "I'd love to. How about Saturday?" A wave of relief washed over her, and a smile curled on her lips. This was it. She had taken the first step. The next chapter was about to begin. And as she looked around her apartment, making sure everything was perfect but not overly polished, she realized something. It didn't need to be perfect. It just needed to be real. Saturday afternoon arrived, and the hours felt like minutes, the anticipation building with every tick of the clock. Anna moved through her apartment with a nervous energy, checking every corner, every detail, as though the smallest imperfection might ruin the evening. But as the time drew nearer, something inside her shifted. She was no longer worried about how everything appeared. It wasn't about the perfect setting, the food, or the wine. It was about being with him, being in his presence, truly allowing herself to experience this connection. When the doorbell rang, Anna's heart fluttered in her chest. She opened the door to find Mark standing there, a slight smile on his face, holding a bottle of wine. He looked so casual, yet so right. His presence in her doorway felt almost surreal, as though the universe had conspired for this moment. "Hi," he said softly, his voice warm and inviting. "I brought this. I wasn't sure what you liked, but I figured it's safe to go with red." Anna smiled, taking the bottle from him. "Red sounds perfect. Come in, please." She stepped aside as he entered, and for a moment, they simply stood there, looking at each other. The space between them was filled with a quiet energy, like a soft hum that had only just begun to play. She suddenly realized how little she actually knew about him beyond their brief exchanges. Yet here he was, standing in her home, a part of her life in a way she hadn't expected. Mark followed her into the kitchen, where Anna had set up a simple spread, cheese, crackers, and some fresh bread she had baked that morning. She felt the need to distract herself, to focus on the details, but every so often, she'd steal glances at him. He was looking at her, his gaze soft, filled with curiosity. "I hope I didn't interrupt anything," he said after a pause. "I didn't mean to make you feel rushed." "No, not at all," Anna replied quickly, her voice steady despite the wild rhythm of her heart. "I just wanted everything to feel natural." They sat down, and the conversation began to flow in a way that felt effortless. The moments of silence weren't awkward, but comforting. She found herself laughing at the way he would tell a story. He had a way of making even the simplest moments seem full of wonder. As they spoke about their lives, their interests, and the paths they had taken, Anna realized just how much she was enjoying this. Not just his company, but the way he made her feel. A live, vibrant scene. At one point, Mark reached across the table to grab a piece of cheese, his hand brushing against hers. It was subtle, almost accidental, but it sent a wave of warmth rushing through her. She met his eyes, and for a moment, the world outside of the two of them faded away. He held her gaze, his expression tender, as if asking if she felt it too. She did. The evening slipped by in a blur of shared stories, laughter, and quiet moments. As the wine began to work its magic, the barriers she had carefully constructed around her heart began to soften. The nervousness, the uncertainty, it all melted into something more fluid, more open. There were no longer any pretenses. Just two people, sitting across from each other, unguarded and real. And then, when the conversation lulled, Mark looked at her with that soft, knowing expression he sometimes wore. "I'm really glad you invited me here," he said quietly. "I've enjoyed getting to know you." Anna's heart skipped. There it was, what she had been longing to hear. She looked at him, a little surprised by how much she felt in that moment. She realized it wasn't just the spark of attraction. It was deeper, more meaningful. It was the way he made her feel like she was seen, heard, and valued, not for her age or the number of years behind her, but for the woman she was in that very moment. She smiled, her voice soft but steady. "I'm glad to, Mark." And just like that, the space between them closed completely, the silence that followed not uncomfortable but full of meaning. She had never imagined her life would take this turn, but as they sat together, her hand resting just inches from his, she realized that some of the best moments in life come when you least expect them. The days that followed their evening together were filled with quiet contemplation. Anna couldn't stop thinking about the warmth of Mark's presence, the way his smile seemed to light up even the simplest moments. She hadn't expected it, hadn't imagined that she in her 50s could experience something like this. She had long since accepted the idea that her days of romantic excitement were behind her. She had grown comfortable with the predictability of her life, content with her routines and the comfortable solitude she had built around herself. But Mark had shattered that illusion. He had brought back something she thought was lost, a sense of possibility, a sense of being seen not as a woman defined by her age or her past, but as someone full of life, full of potential. And as she thought about their connection, about what had begun to blossom between them, Anna found herself wrestling with emotions she hadn't felt in years. She had been cautious, fearful of what this might mean. What would people say? How would they react to a relationship between a woman of her age and a man so much younger? But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that those fears were not hers to carry. Society had its opinions, yes, but those opinions were not going to dictate her happiness. The connection she shared with Mark was real, and it was something that couldn't be ignored just because it didn't fit neatly into the boxes society had drawn. Anna had spent so many years allowing other people's judgments to shape her life. She had hidden parts of herself, certain desires, needs, and dreams, because they didn't align with what others expected of her. But now, with Mark, it was different. She felt free. She felt like herself again. She thought about love, about how it didn't adhere to a set of rules or expectations. Love, at its core, was a meeting of two souls, regardless of the age that separated them, regardless of the lives they had lived before meeting each other. What had age ever truly meant? In the grand scheme of things, it was nothing more than a number. And if anything, it had only added to the richness of her life. The experiences, the lessons, the moments that had shaped her had all led her to this point. She had earned her wisdom, her understanding of herself, and what she wanted. Mark had reminded her that love didn't have to be complicated or constrained by society's views. It could simply be about two people, finding each other at the right time and allowing their hearts to take the lead. He had shown her that it was possible to embrace something new, something unexpected, and to walk into it without fear. With a soft smile on her face, Anna realized that this relationship had given her something invaluable, a second chance. A chance to feel, to be vulnerable, to connect in a way she had long forgotten. She didn't know where it would go, what the future would hold, but for the first time in years, she didn't need to know. She was content in the moment, content in the love that had blossomed between them. Love, she realized, had no expiration date. It wasn't bound by the years that had passed or the ones that might come. It was simply about two people, meeting at the right time in the right place and embracing whatever came next. And as she looked forward, Anna was no longer afraid. She had found something beautiful, and no matter what the world thought, that was all that mattered.